What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with the official start of the 2024-2025 NBA season look-ahead train. We begin with the Washington Wizards, which means we get to talk to the homie and the Discord legend, Matt Moderno. Follow him on Twitter at MattModdderno. He's the host of the Believe in Wizards podcast with former Wizard Jahadi White. They do a great job over there. And he also hosts the DMV Hoops podcast, does some stuff for Bullets Forever. He is awesome. We get into all things Wizards. This is great. And I would just like to reiterate the hoops that Grant and I are jumping through to make sure that this series gets out there, where we cover every single team in depth, getting their own podcast with a local expert. It's pretty trying this year compared to other years when looking at our schedule. So please come out, show support. If you're new around these parts, we have a lot of fun around here covering the entire NBA all year long. So subscribe across all platforms, Spotify, Apple, Stitchers, that's still out there, YouTube, the whole nine. We appreciate all the support, any new listeners that come through this, and of course the OGs as always. Let's get to talking some Wizards with the legendary, and again, Discord legend. Join our Discord. Links in the podcast and YouTube description, Mr. Matt Moderno. Matt, welcome back to the Hardwood Knocks podcast. I think, is this your third? You've been on the pod more than 3 times, but is this your third look ahead? Because last year wasn't the first time.
Third look ahead. Yeah, I think so.
Now it's your fault. I say that to everyone who's done it 3 times. The first 2, I can trick you. But now it's on you. You came back. You know what you're in for. And I appreciate it, obviously. But I like to deflect the responsibility of it onto you now.
Like any good leader should. I think that's kind of where we're at in the world right now. But yeah, thanks for having me. I tell you this every time, and I mean it every time. I listen to the pod religiously. So it's just cool to be on here. And thanks for having me back.
Again, I love it. I really appreciate when people who I listen to or I'm having on as guests also say they listen to. So thank you. That means a lot to both Grant and myself. Let's talk about these Wizards, though. So we're like a little bit more than a year into the rebuild. I remember wasn't this time last summer, but we did probably one of the few people that did like emergency Tommy Shepard stuff, right?
Yep,
like that,
for sure.
That
it's
actually
a short list of people.
Yeah. So what have you made of just everything that's happened since, including this offseason? What have you made of the Wizards' direction overall in terms of both your thoughts and feelings about it, but like also what does this all say about what they're actually trying to do?
There's at least a direction, and some of the moves I'm like trying to figure out a little bit where they're trying to go, but I'm not as worried about them because you at least know there's like an overall, here's the strategy, here's the thing we're trying to do. It just seemed kind of like a rudderless ship under Shepard, and I don't know how much of that was Ted Leonsis. He's a pretty involved owner from what we hear in terms of like kind of pushing, certain things or mandates on the front office. So maybe not all Shepard's fault necessarily, but it seems like he's given these guys kind of carte blanche to go do what they need to do. I do kind of wonder, like, if there's a ticking clock on how long he'll give them to rebuild this. I don't see him being the patient 5 years into a rebuild owner, but, if he gives them till 2026, like, they could probably get a pretty good dent of the way there in terms of, like, at least getting them back to where they were. That's the thing. Like, they had all these like veteran guys and they were still a 35-win team. So like the floor wasn't really that high. You could rebuild for 3 years and be almost just as good as that, that team with like young guys. So I think overall so far, like the moves just kind of make sense in terms of like, all right, let's strip this for parts as much as we can. You can nitpick over, did they hold on to this old guy a little too long and get a little too greedy trying to extract one more 2nd round pick out of them? But like, ultimately, again, at least you can kind of figure out what they're trying to do. Under Shepard, he came in and was like, we will be a playoff team. And then 2 years later, it's like, we're going to fight for the play-in. So like the bar kind of kept lowering itself over time. And now it's like, no, we're going to be bad. And I don't know if this is a national thing, but like Wizards fans, especially DC area fans, we do this thing every year where like we perpetually overrate our own guys. And I think I've hammered the over like 4 years in a row and just look stupid for doing it. This is the first year I'm like, 22 wins is the over under. I'm definitely taking the under. Like, it just seems like a no brainer because I don't think these guys will let them win more than 20 games.
Well, it's off season, so we're all riding hopium, which is, I totally understand that. What's interesting to me is you mentioned this on one of your recent podcasts with Jahadi White. Go subscribe to Believe in Wizards. Mention that in the intro. Links in the podcast and YouTube description. There's another plug. Not something I realized where it's just like, it feels like too many spots are given to veterans, which I think in some instances, I think it could be doing them a disservice. But then you look at the Deni Avdija trade, and regardless of how you actually feel about the return of the Deni Avdija trade, and everyone who listens to this podcast knows that I'm still embattled over it. taking a 2029 first rounder as one of the primary forms of compensation
Mm-hmm.
was almost encouraging to me because it was like, oh, like this front office has real. I know they got Bub Carrington out of it too, and they could flip Malcolm Brogdon, but like the 2029 first round pick, you could make the case, depending on how you feel about Bub Carrington, that that is the most valuable part of that deal, and it's no worse than the second most valuable part.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this to people all the time, and to also remind myself, it's cool to think about, oh, they acquired all these distant first round picks, but front offices don't think in those terms all the time because most of the time they're not going to have their jobs to use
Right.
or trade or make those picks. And so the fact that they accepted a 2029 first as a primary, let's call it a primary form of compensation, I thought it was almost encouraging because it's like, oh, maybe they really will see this through. Now, whether Leonsis gets, itchy over the next year or two is different, but I thought at least that was a good harbinger.
I'm glad you said that because it actually makes me feel better about it. I've been kind of wrestling mentally with how I feel about that trade because I liked Bub. I like Bub still, but it was like we couldn't have gotten the pick in 2025. Like that's the draft everyone wants to be in. But I think the nice thing about 2029 is like that's this sort of nebulous thing to all these GMs that will hold value for a lot
Yeah.
longer. Whereas like almost the minute you draft somebody, they become worth less than that pick in an equivalent draft. Like it's hard. Could you flip Bub for a lottery pick next year? Like I don't know, So it at least 2029 is this far away thing of like it'll maintain value as like it's a first round pick. It's abstract, and I kind of like that too.
What did you make and how did you feel about the decision to stick with Brian Keefe at head coach moving forward? It does seem like they kind of had a real search, but a lot of the stuff that's sort of said about him, it feels very anecdotal based rather than like real evidence based. And so I don't have I won't pretend to have a strong opinion on it. So what did you just sort of make of it?
I don't have a strong opinion on it. Like that's my strong opinion is that my opinion's not that strong on it. Like it's fine. It's like sort of the Brett Brown thing again, I think, just like we know we're going to be bad. This is the guy that we're going to rock with to develop some players and just kind of weather the storm. We're not going to pay like a third coach on, have the third coach on payroll for the next year by moving on to somebody else or whatever. Like I think he's here for the next like probably 2 years. And if they're good again in like 2026 or at least like trending back up in the 2026-27 timeline, like I guess he probably gets a shot at it, assuming he's like helped these guys get better. And they went into last year saying like, as long as Bilal and Denny get better, Wes Unseld has done his job. And well, saw how that worked out for him. But I think Keefe was clearly their guy. They'll give him as like fair a shake as you can get. And then it's on him if he can transition from being a developmental coach to like, all right, starting to build like a competitive team coach. And like I said, I think they'll give him every chance, but I don't really care personally. The guys seem to like him. And at this point, if you can kind of keep the vibes good enough and guys will get better under you. And, it doesn't really matter to me one way or the other. Like no good coach was going to come in here and do anything different. I don't think.
You also have to point to like, okay, well, who's they missed out on, which is tough to do with coaching because we all, or I'll throw myself in here. I like to think I know more about the game of basketball than I actually do. And so it's like, I can't point and be like, well, you really missed out on, you should have went and got, I have said I would have hired Micah Nori for every team just because I don't know if you saw that piece where he works in random turns of phrase and words, like basically off of dares from his players and fellow assistants.
Yeah. Like that's a good vibe.
That's how I would base my hires off of, which is probably why I don't run an NBA team, which is fair.
It's probably better than some of the reasons guys hire people. So, can't go wrong.
He is indebted to me, though. I did include this in the outline because he made Bilal a starter before the fractured wrist. And so like that's enough I think he's earned himself at least a 10-year deal at minimum by doing that.
He gets the assignment. Like, I think that's the biggest thing. Like there wasn't this, like watching the Olympics was really tough because the Wizards were the one ping pong ball away from getting Wembanyama. And they did this late, like win 7 of 10 games surge that year to kind of shoot themselves in the foot. So like, I don't think Keefe will let them do that either. And that's just big enough up front of like, okay, we're winning too many games down the stretch. Like, you know what? Somebody good has a hamstring injury now. I like that.
So I dictate too much of how these podcasts go. So this year, I want to start or at least the beginnings of things. What is the biggest Wizard storyline that you are going to be tracking most closely into this season and throughout it, of course?
Hashtag capture the flag. Like that's what we got to do this year here. We got to beat out Brooklyn or whoever else wants to be real bad. Like that's what this entire season is about for the Wizards is They've got some like nice developmental pieces. Like I'm higher than Coulibaly, higher on him than most, I would say, probably at this point. And Sarr, like, whatever you take from Summer League, let's say you take nothing from it, he's still like, is a guy you look at as like, oh, this is a future, like, star of the franchise. Like, I don't know. I think the ceiling is probably like pretty good starter and versatile guy that every winning team needs. Like, that's great. Is Bub, the next Baron Davis or somebody? Like, I don't know what the ceiling is for someone like him, but probably not to me. I think he's like another really nice piece. So I think this upcoming draft is like the one you have to star hunt in. Like whoever you can get, wherever you can get it in the draft, whoever has like the most star potential of any of them, swing as big as you can. Because they don't have that guy yet to me. So that's what I'd be using this draft for. So you just can't afford to have like 25 wins this year and end up with a 7th pick or something like that.
How do you view it though through the lens of we're now in year what I feels like, I don't know, at least year 5, right? Of the flattened lottery odds. Does that impact your view at all of the value of being like, okay, you can be a bottom 4 team.
Sure.
And there's pretty clear pathway to do that because 14 of the teams in the West aren't currently trying to lose. Yep. But like, it feels like there's almost a trade-off where it's like, well, what cost do you need to do that? Because a 14% chance isn't all that much. And then you have 3 other teams that have the same chance of getting that. So it was always, you're always more likely not to get the number 1 overall pick, which was true beforehand, but those odds have been substantially shortened over the past half decade or whatever it is.
Like, I think Cooper Flagg will be a really good player just from what I've seen, but I think there's some other good pieces in this. So it's just lock yourself into like a top 5 pick. That's the move. If you can get the number 1 pick, great. But can you get VJ Edgecombe at 5 or one of those kind of guys? Like that might be enough, or Ace Bailey or whoever you decide, Dylan Harper, like whoever the next couple guys are for you come draft night. Like they've just got to do that one right and kind of hit big on it, I think, regardless of position or fit or any of those kinds of things. And like, I get like from the odds perspective, like it's not as important to be the absolute worst team anymore, but you've just got to ensure that you're in that like tier of bottom couple of teams, no matter what.
And I think what you just said is that it's not even just the perfect way. It was perfect, but it's the only way to look at it. If you're going to go that route is it's not just, it'd be great to get the number 1 pick, but we want to lock ourselves into the top 5 or whatever it is. And that makes more sense then because we're prepared to not have the number 1, the number 2 pick when it happens.
Yeah. Like your chances of getting up to number 1, they are what they are, but like, I'd much rather be, 2 and fall to 4 than 7 and hope I can get up to 1 or something like that.
So let's start with Bub Carrington, just because we could talk about Denny Avdia with him. What are your thoughts now that you've seen Bub play in Summer League? And also we're just, 2 months removed from that trade. Basically, where do you we understand the thought process, I think, but where do you sort of land on the decision to make it, the return, the whole 9 there?
I think I'm like cautiously optimistic on him and where he can develop into. Like he's young, he's got good positional size. I think what he represents more from like a team building philosophy is more important to me than what we saw from him or, in Summer League or anything like that. The Wizards have had like small guard after small guard running their offense the last like 3 or 4 years, basically since Russell Westbrook. So them drafting a guard that's, I don't know, above average height for like the point guard position and can maybe even play a little bit of off guard. Like that represents to me that they're going with like that OKC model of like positional versatility and sort of like, we can switch 1 through 4 at least kind of stuff. Like this is a team that's 2 years removed from playing 2 drop coverage centers in their starting lineup together. So like getting modern, I think is like a really big step for them. And that's what I see with Bub. Like, is he ever going to be a dynamic enough creator for others to be like a really high level, all-star level point guard? Like, I don't know. Is he explosive enough to be a 20 point per game scorer if if he's not also shooting, 40% from 3 or whatever, or is he going to shoot 40% from 3? Like there's still question marks and there's open things that could limit his ceiling, but I've seen enough really good stuff already that I feel really good about the pick. And even if he doesn't fully pop, where I think he can get, I still like what they're trying to do. And like I said, what he represents as a player. And it makes me feel better about that Denny trade just from a like, okay, at least I get the logic and the rationale and it's a defensible move, whether I like it in a vacuum or not.
What have you sort of, this is so early impressions of it, but the passing, the vision feels like it's further along because the question's been, can he be a full-time kind of floor general or that on-ball guard? And just based off what we've seen so far, it feels like the answer might be closer to yes than we thought, because what I watched from him in summer league, it felt very natural. It felt like the decision making, like the cadence, the speed of it was there. The accuracy of his passes, they were different. They were on target a lot of the time. And then just, you mentioned the size too. And so when I first saw the Denny Avdia trade, I didn't love it for any of the sides. And then I think coming away from it, I like it better for the Wizards, because I think Denny Avdia is fantastic. He was never going to be your best or even second best player on a contender, probably. And now I'm not saying Bub Carrington will, but you get a bite at that apple when you look at what, and also the thing that Denny is, we've both of us, and I think everyone has been begging him to do for years, get those threes up, my guy. And like Bub didn't seem like any problem getting them off in summer league.
Yeah, like I think you nailed it there, right? Like it's Denny's the better player right now. Odds are, just based on how good a player I think he is and you think he is, like he may end up being the better of the two of them long term anyway, but the upside left of Bub turning into an all-star level player is higher to me, I think, than what the upside left of Denny turning into that is. So just even if it's theoretical, I think it's a bigger swing and it represents another kind of roll this over, give ourselves a chance at a future star at the very least. And yeah, I think the passing was great. I don't know how to like take that much away from summer league. It's this unstructured environment, and he's a guy that I think is like built to play in an environment like that. And just not to turn this into like the Hooper versus basketball player discussion or whatever, but like I think he is that kind of just like give him the ball, give him the keys, and let him like go make some plays. Will he be able to like do that in a structured, situation where he has to like run an actual offense? Jury's still out on that. And I think people that saw highlights saw like the really good stuff. But there were times last year where like Pittsburgh like had to give the keys back to Ish Leggett because like Bub just wasn't ready for that. So it's better than I think it would be, than I thought it would be at this stage probably of things. But I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains this year too.
Do you, or would you care to guess like what type of agency will he have over the actual Wizards offense? Because we know what they're doing as a direction. So it feels like it's easy, like just plumb the depths of his on-ball skills. But you have Malcolm Brogdon, you have Jordan Poole, you have Kyle Kuzma, like, and if you want to saddle Bilal Coulibaly with more volume, like there are other mouths to feed. So do you have any sense or any guesses to, will they really let him loose and try and run the offense? Or do you think his role might be, which is also the problem with summer league, is a lot of the times these guys are playing different roles there than they will with the Wizards. So do you envision it being, it'll always be scaled back, but could it be a dramatic scale back from what they were doing with him there?
Yeah, I think so. Just given how kind of like deliberate they were with the progression for Coulibaly last year, that seems to signal to me that they're going to be patient. They're going to take their time. I thought they kind of let, especially Alex Sarr, kind of be out over his skis at summer league. And I don't like that personally. Like I'd rather this, here are like really simple things we can give you right now, show you can do them, and then we add more. Okay. Then you can do this next thing. Then we add something else to it. I think that's what they'll try to do with him. And to be honest with you, like I expect Jared Butler to be the backup point guard to start the season on a non-guaranteed deal, but just a little like more solid and ready to go, I think, at this point. And they may play some together. He may kind of mix in with the starters as more of like an off-ball guy, secondary ball handler kind of thing. But I don't think they're going to just be like, here you go, Bub, day one, like you're running the show anytime Jordan Poole's not in here ready to do it. And there's also just like, I know Jordan Poole was better as kind of the lead creator, but there was some really bad Jordan Poole last year too. And there might be nights where it's just like, we just need a steadying hand. And I don't know if you want to go from Poole if he's having kind of like a wild night to a rookie. So I expect like Butler to be the guy they give the ball to just be in here, be steady, be solid. Don't do anything flashy. Just like bring the ball across half court and run the set. That's my guess though.
He's also one of the players that I think invites people to use the word wiggle. That might have been, I think he was one of the first players I've heard wiggle. It's been in the vernacular forever, but when he was with Utah and I was in love with him, he was the first player I think I ever out loud spoke wiggle for. So, and they also have, you're talking about steadiness. Like for now they have Malcolm Brogdon too. And that could be something else that factors into it. So is Alex Sarr the biggest draft bust of all time or what?
Yeah. I mean, he's got to be top 3 ever. Like if you're looking, it's him, probably Olowokandi. I actually think Kwame turned into like a decent post defender. So I don't know.
Like Anthony Bennett carved out a nice career. Will Sarr even last that long? Yeah,
probably not. If you had to bet, just based on half of the Wizards fan base's reaction to it. who cares how he performed? Like, this is one thing we talked a lot about on our show because I have a center on the show who played in summer league, and he talked about how hard that is, to come in as a rookie and just be like, okay, no one's going to pass me the ball. Cool. When I get it, I'm going to do something crazy. And honestly, I think the leash was a little too long, and they just let him get away with like doing some wild shit out there. Honestly, like we don't need Alex Sarr step back threes when he's already 0 for 12 to start a game. Like that should have never been something that was allowed to happen. So it's as much there to blame as he is, I think. But if he gets stronger and gets a little tougher, and I think if they got a couple like Valanciunas is kind of, there to encourage and mentor him or whatever, at least for part of the season, I don't think they're going to let him get away with like floating to the perimeter as much as he did kind of from day one there. And when you go back, like I went and watched that G League Ignite game, the first one where he was like really good at the beginning of last season. And like, he was not afraid to mix it up, and he was like going to the rim at them and stuff. So like, I think when he gets like kind of catches back up to the level of physicality and competition and things like that, like I'm not too worried about it long-term personally. It just, they're going to simplify for him at least.
Oh, so you do think they're going to simplify? Because you and Jihadi had talked a lot about him playing within himself, or whatever you guys were saying.
Yeah.
And my question was, do you think that they're actually like sort of built to do that for him? Yeah. Like they have enough sort of that secondary infrastructure to be, hey, you're going to be more of this play finisher that isn't floating around the perimeter too much. And so focus on connecting on your screens, finishing more physically. You think they're built to that, but you think that they will try to wire him to actively do that rather than give him too much of a rope?
I sure hope so. I don't know what they're doing if they don't. Like if he's got kind of two paths to follow in practice, and he can watch 6'10" Kyle Kuzma like ISO on the perimeter, or he can watch Marvin Bagley like try to post somebody up and just finish easy buckets around the rim. Like I'm hoping he goes more in the Bagley direction early, and then use the downtime and the offseason and things like that to kind of work on the skill set and slowly kind of add those other things on. I want him to outrun the other centers. I want him to close up a lot of like holes for people defensively, catch a couple lobs here and there if he can, get a couple putbacks. Like just if he does that, like I think that's a really good rookie year, just considering where he is. And then you wait for the other stuff to come around. Like the short roll passing was really good. If they want to, put him on the elbow and let somebody kind of like run off of him, like I'm cool with something like that. But he should not be like ISO creating at any point in a game, in the NBA. And I definitely don't think they'll let him do any of that like the first half of the year at the very least.
Do you anticipate like Keefe trying to play him and Valanciunas together, or was that strictly we want Jonas to show Sarr his shoulder workout?
I think they're going to have to, just where he's at. Like he was getting muscled by dudes, 3 inches smaller than him at this point. And I think just unless they're just willing to like be so bad in his minutes that like he might be sort of one of the least productive players in the NBA this year that's actually going to get minutes, because I think they will play him, but I would hope that they kind of have enough support around him or realize the kind of support he needs, whether it's Rashawn Holmes or Bagley or one of these other guys. Like I just don't think you can leave him out there as like the lone like real big. Like if it's him next to Kuzma and then whoever Bilal at the 3 or whatever, like they're going to get just destroyed anywhere around the rim, I think.
Do you think that he can handle that sort of off big role then, though? Because it's like if you're playing with Jonas Valanciunas, even has some stretch, but like the things we're talking about Alex Sarr doing is avoiding being on the perimeter. It's like I don't know if Jonas Valanciunas is a good enough floor spacer to then open up the lane for him to do a lot of the stuff, or even just at the elbows, like open that space for him to occupy.
The answer is no, but I don't think you have a choice. Like, I don't think there's enough there for him to do those things, but I also don't think you can leave him alone as the only big on the court. And I think there's more of a chance of him just feet set hitting like wide open corner threes than there are him, controlling the defensive glass alone out there. So to me, it's like, let's pick your poison here. I think he's better off like just stand in a corner, and if you're, open, shoot it. Or drive or slash a little bit more, then I think he could kind of handle, I don't know, even backup centers, alone.
I'm very interested to see what he looks like, because I liked his defense more coming out of school than his offense. I think most people were there too. And I'm curious, like not even just the role they're going to kind of throw him in, but when this team is clearly built not to be so great defensively. Do you worry about him picking up bad habits or getting discouraged? Because he is probably going to be shouldering regardless of who he's playing with, regardless of whether he's the only big on the floor, just so much responsibility. And I think we've seen, using Jalen Duren in Detroit as an analog, like what can kind of happen when there's like, if you don't have guys who can keep the ball in front of them and you're young and you're still learning, it could be disastrous. And so like, I really do value Alex Sarr's malleability, and I think he can make a bunch of kind of plays even when he's not the primary rim protector. I'm just curious to see if we can come away from this offseason seeing enough of the flickers of that, given like just the rest of the Wizards roster. And I almost would, when you just kind of look at how they're built at the moment, like I might just tie so many of his minutes to Bilal Coulibaly's, and maybe even throwing Malcolm Brogdon, like just as guys who might profile as immediately competent to good defenders, because I think that makes wherever you're going to have him, but like on the lower lines, it feels like it will make his job easier, and we might learn more about what he could do at his absolute peak.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I've worried about every person the Wizards have drafted for the last 25 years picking up bad habits defensively, because there's just been a glut of bad, lazy defenders on most of these rosters. So that's like my perpetual fear. But I think that's the nice thing about the guys they're drafting is, or at least the guys they're drafting high, like Coulibaly and Sarr, are rooted, I think, in trying to play the right way and play and actually care about defense. And I think his natural tools and skills will just kind of like prevent him from ever being like a total bum on the defensive side. Like he's just too long and too mobile to not at least be eventually a plus defender, even if there's a couple of bad habits here or there. And then you just have to trust that you can get a good enough coach to kind of, smooth over the rough edges over time. But I'm with you. Like I would be putting him with guys that aren't going to like totally leave him out to dry a lot and have to like cover up too much for them. And just same kind of thing, keep the defensive role as simple as it can early. And then, hopefully maybe you can kind of scale up over time as you go too.
I've waited long enough. Let's do 2 hours on Bilal Coulibaly.
Perfect.
But actually, so what stood out, impressed you, or surprised you most about what he did as a rookie before his injury?
I thought he was just like not scared to take on like really tough defensive assignments. And there were a couple times it looked really bad in my opinion. And that's maybe not a popular opinion with the rest of the fan base here, but he got cooked a few times but didn't seem at all discouraged by that. And like the thing I liked most about Deni Avdija from day one was the defense. Like I was the skeptic on whether the offense would come around enough to kind of justify the role that you'd want from him in terms of where the defense was. So, but I liked the defense from day one. It was just, he would get frustrated and you could see it, and the fouling and things like that. Like he couldn't reconcile what was and wasn't allowed or expected of him as like a rookie defender guarding Kawhi Leonard or LeBron or whatever. Coulibaly like seemed kind of like up for the challenge and like a little more like to take a little more joy out of it. And I like the Deni approach of like, I'm taking this so seriously, but also like, you also kind of have to have fun with it a little bit too, especially as a rookie, of just like, cool, look at this moment where I'm going to go guard Luka, and he might still score 25, but I thought at least he was better defensively right away against the best players than I think you could typically safely expect from a rookie player to be. And honestly, I think he was one of their more impactful defensive players overall. Like just using the Deni analog again, like Deni was a really good player, but I don't think he made the other guys on the court around him better or the overall team defense better. Whereas I saw enough from Coulibaly to think like he can be that kind of guy, like the length, the recoverability, like all those things, guarding multiple positions, like I think that's something that like just excited me long-term enough that, even if he's going to get beat a few times on some dumb stuff, like that's okay, because it's the sort of still theory of him and what he could turn into.
I'm also wondering if he gets, I totally agree with everything you said. I wonder if he also gets better, or is at least more intriguing, because I know fans weren't happy with his role with France, or basically how he played, but he looks like he might have gotten stronger. We are on Muscle Watch. It's Muscle Watch season. Yep. So maybe I'm drinking too much Kool-Aid there, but he does look stronger. And so that intrigues me even more, because he held up so well in a lot of assignments that you were referencing. And it was not that he was weak, but like this didn't look like someone who was built to cover. So even at his, not his peak, but like even if you took the most optimistic outlook on Bilal Coulibaly, the rookie defender, some of the guys he was going up against, he just held up. They looked so much bigger and stronger than he was. And I'm like, well, if he like put on like real size now, like what does that mean?
Yeah, like there was a play last year where like LeBron put like a shoulder into him, and I thought he was gonna like just float away because he was just like he's just wasn't there yet. Whereas like in the Olympics, like he was fine. He just same kind of thing. Looked up for the challenge, seemed to fit into the scheme pretty well there defensively, and it was a thing that was interesting. Like all last year in the draft, like everybody praised Steph Castle for UConn because like, oh, here's this 5-star recruit that comes in and is just willing to be like this like switchable, malleable team defender. And like, he was willing to kind of take on that role and just be fine with that. And now it's like, well, Coulibaly, like, why is he okay just being like, standing in the corner and just being like a defender? It's like we can't really pick and choose like when that's optimal. He's a 20-year-old playing minutes on an Olympic team, and he held up reasonably well. It's like, well, I wish he would have had a few more like ISO plays for himself. Like I don't care about any of that stuff personally. So I thought he was great.
Looking at his role with the Wizards, though, do you think they're going to attempt at all this year to expand his offensive uses, even if it's a matter of now, if it's me, I'm just going to put the ball in his hands and be like, all right, let's really see what this does. But even more is, I thought what he did well, and I wouldn't call it a strength of his game, but like there was a lot of plays where it's like, if he was a screener or if he just caught the ball in the center of the floor, I thought he had really good vision and like decision making in those scenarios. And it's like, I would like to see more of that. Then I know they have so many bigs that maybe they don't view him in that way, but it's like, I'm at the point where the Wizards, I would call it hashtag just try shit. And so do they have they have the timeline, but when you're looking at the personnel, like, are they going to have the flexibility to experiment more with Bilal?
I think you'll see more of it. I wonder if that's partly what some of the willingness to trade Denny is just free up minutes there to do those kinds of things. And also I think the Denny move, you're only going to be so good if you trade away the guy who was probably your best player last year, at least arguably one of your 2 best players. So, but the other part of that though, I think is free up a few more secondary creator touches for Coulibaly and see if he can do some of that stuff. And maybe you can run a little bit more and let him be like more of a transition finisher and just see like all the different stuff he may or may not be good at. And that also kind of helps you assess going into next season, the other things you want him to work on. Like, I think the one thing about like the Olympics is all the overall benefit, it's still a plus, but he didn't get as much dedicated, just like be in a gym with a trainer working on tightening his handle kind of time so far. And he's got until the start of the season to do that. But like next season, I think is going to be maybe the biggest season for him skill development wise in his whole career. So it's just use this year to figure out like where the holes still are. And then you can also kind of measure progress from last year. Like I'm assuming even in practices and things like that, he probably got to do a few more things. So they'll know even anecdotally, like, okay, he looks more comfortable handling or initiating in the pick and roll or being the roller or just, for the try shit out kind of approach. Like I think you can kind of try a few more things out. And especially in the second half of the year, I don't, between Brogdon, Valanciunas, and Kuzma, I would imagine 2 of the 3 of them are not on the roster after the deadline. So that's a lot less touches and that's more that can go to him. So I'm hopeful that they'll kind of scale up over the year too.
So maybe he'll get that like mid-season Denny bump that we saw last year.
That's exactly what I'm expecting. Yeah.
So Kyshawn George, what's the lowdown on him? And you mentioned this at the top about where it seems like they're trying to get these guys with a lot of defensive versatility and can do different things on offense. And he fits that mold to a T. I think people seem very split on like what he's going to be like if you need him to do anything on ball. I think I've seen some of I keep calling it film, but of the possessions I've watched of him, like there are possessions when I can see it and there are possessions where I can't, but he seems quintessentially, if you remove that from the equation, like, oh, this is something you just plug in and he'll play at both ends of the floor.
I expect him maybe to start a little more on like the Capital City Go-Go this year, early in the year. And again, maybe as they kind of clean out like the glut of some of these older guys, that's another person that they free up to get a few more minutes for, in the latter part of the season. But yeah, he's 6'7". He actually shoots it. He like was just throwing the ball all over the place in summer league and had a lot of turnovers and things like that. But I don't think turnovers in that setting are like actually that bad of a thing because it's like a willingness to try stuff. And he wasn't like scared to try to like split a double team of like really quick handed small guards, which is just like bold and shows some confidence. And I think you just want like a rookie at that stage that's not kind of timid. Like there's an old like John Thompson line of like, I'd rather calm down a fool than raise a corpse. And I think that applies for like rookies of just like, I kind of like a little irrational confidence because we can scale that back and kind of rein you in a bit. So him trying to do stuff is cool. And if he can do a little bit of like playmaking and give you some versatility, great. It's the defense is where he's at. Can your strength and conditioning and things like that help him be mobile enough to actually guard more than like one position? I think that's really going to be the question as he bulks up and fills out over time. Does that kind of like slowly move him to the 4 position and like stick him there? Can he be Kyle Anderson-y in that sort of like, I can guard 3s and 4s and, maybe do a little bit of creation for people and stuff like that. Like that's kind of the player I'd be looking at with just like a cleaner jump shot.
How do you think this team views Corey Kispert, who does some things very well? And I like, there's no other player really, when you're looking at the way he's able to get off his shots, like there's not really anyone else on the roster like that. I think if you wanted to, you could try and use Jordan Poole that way, but like he likes and needs the ball, whereas Kispert just does not. Where does he sort of factor in? And I asked that too, because he is extension eligible. So is that someone that you would think that this front office might be interested in keeping if the price is right, or would you more expect this to leak into restricted free agency next year?
I think the single most impressive thing this front office has done has been the contracts they've locked guys into. Like, I think that's why I felt like the return for Denny was a little light personally, is because the contract was so good. And that should have had more value to a better team longer term. And the Kuzma deal is great, like the sending contract, all this kind of stuff. So I would expect them to try to get like a team friendly extension done. And just if I'm Cory and I'm looking at the market, from this summer, it's like, fringe starter on a bad team kind of minutes. Like, how much money am I really going to make in the open market? So do I take a $10 million a year deal? Or is like, it's really movable for the Wizards, but it's pretty solid money for him. And then you can kind of go either way with it. If he continues to develop and he can actually guard somebody this year and beyond, like, okay, maybe he can be a part of the long-term future. If he can't, is he just like some shooting for a team like the Magic or somebody that could desperately use like a little extra shooting? So that could maybe cover up more for his, defensive liabilities and stuff like that. So I think the nice thing with him is like, if you can get him on a good deal, you can kind of go either way with it. So I'd expect them to try, but also not like break the bank to do it.
What's interesting too is, so when you mentioned the Denny Avdia thing, is we were talking about before we actually started recording how topsy-turvy the market seems.
Yep.
But some of the people, when they baked in the Denny Avdia trade, is like, well, that contract's so good as you can't extend him off of it. And so it's like, this just doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, so you have players who are going in the open market, not getting paid, but you have teams that might not be accepting as much because they don't think they can extend him off these numbers. So I don't know how much that factored in, but that might be one way of looking at the Avdia trade is, if you're worried that he's not going to extend off the current number, because that deal is a steal. I could, even when he signed it. So we're talking like pre-Avdia breakout at that point.
Immediately, it looked like a great deal.
Yeah. So maybe that factored into it, but I find it interesting how it's like, are you going to be able to extend him off of it? But meanwhile, like Gary Trent Jr. just signed for the minimum. So
yeah, exactly. No, it's a great point. And I kind of hadn't thought about that way of just like, that does cap your value to certain teams long-term, but he's still got multiple years left on it. I think that's like a good problem to have and try to figure out later. And he's another guy that you could flip at the end of that deal again to a playoff team probably.
So what is the goal with Jordan Poole at this point? And just because I destroyed him on this podcast probably a bunch of times, and some of it might have been uncalled for, he did, I thought, do a better job like later in the season. We saw some more control over the offense and the passing out of the pick and rolls. But like, what is just looking at what they got to take him on, what is the actual point of Jordan Poole? Like, are they hoping to rehabilitate and flip him? Or is this someone they look at like, maybe we have this kind of microwave scorer, secondary playmaker that we can keep long-term on this roster?
Yes. Your guess is as good as mine and maybe as good as theirs at this point. I think it was like them trying to do some stuff and hope that they could immediately rehab him in a new setting. And then maybe the Draymond punch really just threw him off, that much. And I think there was like clearly some limitations there that Golden State helped kind of hide or protect a little bit better. And you mentioned maybe you could use Poole in like a Kispert kind of way. They tried that early in the year and he showed like very clearly he was not there as an off-ball player to kind of like play that way. And I think even if they can rehab his value as like this hyper high usage on ball guard, there are very few teams in the league that are going to want to let him do that, I think, or be built to need him to do that because they're going to have better, more efficient guys in that super high usage role. And what he basically proved last year was like, if you need him to be kind of this like secondary guy, he's not seemingly well equipped to do that. And so I actually think even the second half of last year may have hurt his value more. The best way to rehab it is to actually show that he can do some of those off ball things again, because
That's a
that
good
makes
point.
him maybe more palatable to flip to a playoff team. Like if I'm the Lakers or somebody, am I going to let him come in and have like a 30% usage rate on a team with LeBron and Anthony Davis? No, but if he could do like Austin Reevesy types things for me, like, maybe that's a little easier to take on like that huge number with only a year and a half left on the deal when he gets to that point. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know. I just think at this point you just kind of like let it play out, and if you can maybe flip him down the road, great. And if not, like it's just somebody to kind of be your tank commander until then.
And that's a great point. And the other challenge here now is that, okay, we've had 2 consecutive seasons of Jordan Poole not being good. And the same way that it feels like anecdotally, and I mean, probably there's evidence for this too, is like once a player signs for the minimum, it's very hard for them to be viewed as more than a minimum player. Like Brook Lopez is an exception. He goes from biannual to just making, has a bidding war last year, like using the Rockets as a stalking horse.
Sure.
But with Jordan Poole, it's like he can have a great season, like through up to the February trade deadline. And teams are just probably going to be reticent to pull the trigger on a deal for him because of what just happened over the past couple of seasons, which is like creates an interesting challenge. Fantastic point on like, if you can get him not just doing, but like making shots or leveraging, like like getting defenses to react to him off the ball, like that would be the pathway to not even just rehabbing his value, but like there's a theory of him on this team. Yeah.
It's like, that's the thing for me. Like I've seen Kyle Kuzma be this like third, fourth offensive piece on a good team. So if I'm a team trading for somebody, I know I can let him do that. And if I need more offense, he can take on more offense. If I need him to be switchable, he can take on, more defensive responsibilities or more playmaking. Like there's versatility there. Poole is like this very one-dimensional, I need to be like broke man's James Harden and have everybody revolve around me to like contribute in a at least semi-positive way. And I mean, maybe that's a little harsh. Like I'm with you. I thought he was so much better the second half of the season, but he was also on my Mount Rushmore of players I hated watching most in a Wizards uniform in the first half of the season. So like the bar was really low. And I still can't really reconcile, like, will we see more positive growth, or the second half of the season is just that kind of like the peak of what he'll be, as a Wizard.
And also, even like the steadiest version of Jordan Poole is still a little anarchic. Like a lot of the plays like seem like they come off broken. Oh, he dribbled too much, and like the defenses for some reason overreacted to this guy being in circles and found somebody. But if it works, it works. I can't bring myself, I don't want to say care, but to think too much about like Kyle Kuzma, Malcolm Brogdon, and Jonas Valanciunas. Are they very much and you might have alluded to this already earlier in the podcast, like, are they very much the transient placeholders that they seem like on this team?
I hope so. I think all Wizards fans kind of hope so. Like I irrationally like Kyle Kuzma. I also just don't need all 3 of them to be here long term. Like if you can't get real value back for Kuzma, like keep him the length of the contract. Somebody's got to make 20 million on this team to eat, the salary floor, and somebody's got to take on a certain amount of on-ball reps. Like I actually think that actually helps shield your rookies a little bit when they're not asked to do way too much, way too early and break their confidence and things like that. But like, as presumably some of these younger guys want to scale up over time, can you have Poole and Kuzma and a few of these other vets like eating up so many of those minutes? I don't think so personally. Like a Brogdon is maybe easier because he's kind of like less usage and a little more just malleable to what you need him to be and can do that veteran leadery thing. Valanciunas, maybe same kind of way, but over time, like I don't think he's in the long-term future. They've also got a glut of bigs. I think now at a certain point, like, do we really need a full year of Valanciunas, Rashawn Holmes, and Marvin Bagley? So is there anyone there that you could potentially flip for anything? Like, I don't think anyone's wanting to trade for Rashawn Holmes at $13 million a year or whatever the case may be, unless it's part of a bigger trade. So like Bagley is the one I would look at, is like, maybe he's still young enough that if you can keep him healthy and productive for a full year, like maybe another team could talk themselves into it. But like, you got to move somebody for something. Like the cupboard was so bare from an asset perspective, when they took over this rebuild, that just like, they've kind of like struck out a couple times on flipping some of these vets for assets. Like the Tyus Jones thing is tough. Like if you had even 2 second round picks, on the table at the deadline and you chose to keep him and you don't get anything for him, like that's kind of rough. So you got to turn some of these dudes into something at some point. Like you can't afford to let them all leave here and not get anything out of it either.
I wonder if the way the stuff played out with Tyus Jones will inform how they handle Malcolm Brogdon a little bit, where it's just a similar situation in the sense it's an expiring contract of a useful player, but if you're holding out for a first, I don't know if you get that for him.
If you get 2 like real second round picks, like I would just go help him move tomorrow. I mean, like it's just whatever you can do to get some value and some kind of tangible asset for him. If it's like top 50 protected, like, okay, the other team can kind of kick rocks with that. But like, if it's real stuff that you could turn into a player or use to, trade up in a draft and get a real player, like that's actual value to me. But if, you're holding out for a first round pick for him, I think just given what we've seen, he makes enough money that unless a team is really desperate for exactly that player, there's the injury history there, like all this other kind of stuff. Like he's a risk. And how much are you really going to give up to take a 30-year-old guy that's got foot problems? I think it's questionable.
Kyle Kuzma is fascinating in the sense that he's on a deal that's just incredible. It declines. It's a good contract if you're like from a team perspective, and he's a very useful player. But I think if you rewind back to his time with the Lakers, the concern was always like, what is he going to look like on defense? Not how does he fit into like a larger offensive ecosystem? And I almost kind of feel like that's flip-flopped in Washington, where if you're a good team trying to trade for him, and I wonder if that's because like I'm at the point where it's if you're going to get the equivalent of like 2 first-round picks for him, it's not even just do it. It's like if that offer was on the table, they've already done it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think I didn't buy the whole like we didn't trade him to Dallas because he didn't want to go and we're such nice guys kind of thing. Like I think if they'd really gotten like a real 2 first-round pick offer, like they would just wished him well and just said this is a good enough spot and we're happy to send you there, and probably wouldn't have been in a hurry to trade Gafford if they didn't have to get something back. So I think you're right. To me, if I were another GM, I wouldn't worry about that just because I know there's some team out there that would need him to come in and be some instant offense off the bench or whatever the case may be, or like run bench units. Not that he needs to come off the bench, but you know what I mean? Like the secondary extra scorer kind of guy. And in the playoffs, he's still a guy that can get his own shot and do some of these other things where like I was looking at that Dallas team, like you didn't really want Derek Jones Jr. to ever put the ball on the floor. You didn't really want PJ Washington to put the ball on the floor. Like they played kind of, above their pay grade overall, but could they have used 1/3 guy that could actually create for himself when like
the answer is yes,
defenses really lock in? Yeah. So like to me, I think that would have been a valuable pickup for him if they could have made it work. And for them, like a late first round pick, if that's what it took to get it done, I would do that if I were a team. So it's just going to really depend on who the team is and what the need is at the deadline. If I know you're Boston or something, you've got to do something to make a move because you've been kind of stagnant and fizzled out in the first round of the playoffs the last 2 years. Like, could you get 2 late firsts from Milwaukee or whoever the case, like that kind of team? I don't know who has that to give up, but I'm okay with them holding out because there's no like ticking clock on him. The contract is going to look better over time here.
It's still funny because he doesn't make as much sense anymore, but Dallas would still be a good fit because I guess they have Clay now and Najee Mark, but they're just like so fucking huge. Like their perimeter players, with the exception of Kyrie, are just big. And so, but yeah, I actually don't think when you look at Kuzma specifically, he doesn't seem to be like a malcontent in Washington. So that's great. And as you said, you need to give someone the money. He does kind of fill a need. The only way that I would look at it as, oh, he needs to go, because they're going to be bad enough too, is this infringing in any way upon the development of all of these other players who are more important to a longer term picture? And I don't think, to be clear, I don't think it's like his personality or something that he would do deliberately or go rogue on the court that does that, but his play style on offense within this group might inherently kind of cap how much, like you could probably find a way to make Bub Carrington still get plenty of floor general reps, but well, as long as Kyle Kuzma's here, like, is it going to be a lot more difficult to give Bilal Coulibaly more offensive responsibility, or even get Kyshawn George to a point where it's, we want to have him get regular minutes with the big club?
Yeah, this is kind of the tough part, I think, because I think he's actually malleable enough that the answer is no. He probably doesn't hold them back because like that first year when he came in, he was content to be like kind of more of a creator and just take shots when he was with like, the other bench guys and stuff like that. But he was willing to defer in the first quarters to Porzingis and defer in the fourth quarter to Beal. And like, that wasn't a problem. So I think you can You can play him some at the 3, play him some at the 4. Could you do a little small ball 5? Like, he can do other things enough that I don't think he inhibits these other guys. To me, it's really Poole that does that, right? Like, he needs the ball so much, and he's just like exclusively a 1, 2 lead offensive facilitator, initiator type. And like, does that hold a Bub back longer term? Like, to me, it's easier to play Bub next to Malcolm Brogdon and let them kind of like, my turn, his turn, like who runs the show. But you can't trade Poole. Like, he's untradeable at this point. So you're kind of stuck with him. So if somebody has to go, it's probably Kuzma. But I don't think in a vacuum, he'd kind of be a problem in that sense.
No, and maybe I'm being too narrow-minded about it. I guess I was viewing it more as like there's a difference of being deferential to Bradley Beal and Kristaps Porzingis than Bub Carrington and Alex Sarr type deal.
I think he seems to like get the assignment enough of like, he's trying to do all like the off-court veteran leadership stuff. Like, you heard Denny say all the time, like, he's the guy that would play one-on-one with me after practice every day and help me grow my game. Like, I think there's enough like ancillary benefit to having him on the roster that if you told him like, hey, we need you to be more deferential and create for some of these guys, it seems like he's a willing enough dude to want to do that, but maybe not.
I'm realizing just now that I didn't fill out a top 10 outline, and the thing I sent you for this team, it was last year's. What does the top 10 rotation to you look like at full strength for this roster?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple no-brainers here, right? Like, Poole's going to play a ton of minutes. Kuzma's going to play a ton of minutes. Again, at least for the first half of the year, this is how I'm projecting it out. I think Valanciunas is going to get plenty of minutes, although you don't need to play him a ton. I think Coulibaly is going to get a good amount of minutes. I think Kispert's going to get a good amount of minutes. I think Brogdon gets a good amount of minutes. So you're at 6 right now. That's when it starts to be like, all right, we'll kind of see what they're, willing to do here. Like I said, I think Jared Butler gets a decent amount of minutes, especially early. So that's probably 7. And then it's probably one of Holmes or Bagley plays some minutes as another big. So that probably puts you at 8. I think Sarr is definitely going to get minutes. That's 9. And then I think Bub has to get a certain amount of minutes. So that's probably your 10. The Wizards also seem like very willing to like play some randos. So could there be a long stretch where Eugene Amarui is getting minutes or Justin Champagnie is getting minutes? Like, that wouldn't really surprise me that much either. So I think that would be like the 10 I would go with. And then somebody's out with injury. One of those other guys kind of fills in here and there.
This is terrible podcasting on my part, but like this is one of the teams where that question just feels like it holds no water because not just there will be turnover, but like a 10-man rotation feels thin based off like how they're going to run their team.
Yeah. Rotate through everybody and let them all get minutes. Like, I'd like to see Bagley play, like I said, just to see if he has any, flippability in him. But, if he can't stay healthy, he can't stay healthy. So he was like kind of good here for the 30 games or whatever he played. It's only like 30 games or whatever. So that's really the challenge with him too.
You can approach this question however you want, whether you think that they should be wanting to lose said crunch time game or win said crunch time game. What is that most used clutch lineup you're going to go to?
What do I think they'll go with, or what would I go with?
You can give me both. I mean, like you could also do the tank commander route where it's like, well, I'm going to put players on the court that I know will lose said close game.
I think if they're going to like try to win a game at the end, it's probably Valanciunas, Kuzma, Coulibaly, some of the time maybe. I think Kispert's out there for the shooting because they'll trust him to do like good offensive things. And Poole will definitely be out there. So like situationally, it's probably, you need more ball handling. Maybe you go Brogdon. Do you need more wingy defenderiness? You go Coulibaly. But those are probably the 6 guys I think get the most consideration, with the game on the line.
Is there a weird, random, offbeat lineup you're hoping that they'll roll out this season?
I'd love to see a little Sarr, Kuzma, Coulibaly, Kispert, Poole, or maybe Bub kind of stuff, and just get a little weird with it and try to run on people and play fast. But it would also just be like a terrible defensive rebounding unit too. So it's a little hard to pull off.
I want to see something that's no bigs and no like quote unquote guards. Give me Bub
guys.
Yeah, give me Bub, Bilal, Kuzma, Kispert. And it has to be Justin Champagnie, I think. I think that's maybe Kyshawn. Let's go all kids. Kyshawn George. There it is. Done.
I'd be all in on that. The second half of the year, they could just play them 35 minutes a game like that. I'd be fine.
I'd watch. So if they're looking to get people to tune in, I think that's a way to get people to tune in. So Does this team have any potential strengths or just what's something about them that's flying under the radar that maybe people aren't talking about enough?
Like young legs is always annoying for other teams to play, and I think they'll play enough young guys that like in March they're going to be kind of annoying to play against. And I think Poole will be better this year, and he's got enough, heat checkness to him that that could maybe make this tougher on a couple playoff teams or people worried about like their playoff seeding and stuff like that. So I think they could maybe be like kind of fun, spoilery guys the second half of the year. Although keep in mind, I don't think they'll want to win too many games. I think the first like 2/3 of the year, they're going to really struggle to win like 7 or 8 games. So if they win 10, down the stretch of the year, like it's probably not the worst thing in the world.
I really hope, though, you mentioned the young legs thing. I think more teams might take this seriously in general if they pick up what happened last year. This would just be an objectively funny team to run off a bunch of wins in like the NBA Cup games.
Yep.
Where it's just like it's the Wizards. Like this game matters. Technically, we don't need to get up for them. And then it's just, oh no, like they played all the vets and they just like they tried really hard and they won. Yeah. And oh my God, they're advancing.
They scored 140 on us. Yeah, like exactly.
That's what, and by the way, that's what I want. I mentioned this to Laz Jackson when we were doing the Pistons look ahead. Mm-hmm. That's what I really want to happen with the NBA Cup. Like the Pacers were nice, but anyone who follows the NBA, even if you don't watch them, knew the Pacers were good and up and coming. I want just this random ass team like Charlotte to just run off, or Detroit or Washington, or like Portland this year, just get super frisky in the NBA Cup games. I think that would be great.
Portland's like weirdly the one I could see do it. Like the pieces don't really fit, but there's enough like decent pieces there that could they get hot and rattle off a couple wins in a row like that? Like I could kind of see that.
They have like a lot of good individual defenders now, like Klingon, Avdia, Jeremy Grant, Matisse Thybulle is there. Tamani Kamara was fantastic for them. So that would be a team where they might win every game is in the 90s at that point, but it could work. So I'm rooting for that. I root for chaos, but I just want a random team to just like at least advance like really deep into the NBA Cup tournament.
Yeah, get weird with it. I'm all for that.
So as we're recording this, which is in the middle of August, they're over under. I used FanDuel for this 21.5. Yeah. Would you take the over under on that? And how many wins do you actually see them ending up with?
I'm in like the 16, 17 kind of territory, I think here. And I think on paper, they probably are like a 22-win team. I just don't think that this front office will like let that happen. And that's kind of the main thing I'm banking on with them is just like, please, for the love of God, don't let that happen. So I would like hammer the under and feel like incredibly safe about it. There's just no world to me where this is like a 25-win team. And there was like a decent amount of like Wizards Twitter as they signed, Valanciunas, that was like, oh, are we too good now? It's like, come on, guys. Like you traded away Avdia, like he's probably your best player. And like Jones was a better player than I think we were willing to give him credit for. He just kind of didn't fit next to Poole, but like they objectively got worse because now more minutes are going to go to rookies. And historically that doesn't really like end well for teams. So there's no way that they hit the over to me.
I agree with everything you said. And the biggest thing is the front office just isn't going to let that happen. And the only way I could kind of see them, not the only way, but if they hit the over, it almost feels like, well, they didn't give the young kids enough run for the first half of the season and they won too many games because Poole was good. Kuzma was good. Jonas Valanciunas was good. Malcolm Brogdon was good. And that's not a situation you want to be in because it's okay. It might be fun to win some games, but you want to develop your youth. It's not just, oh, it's February, we could play the kids. Like it's just.
The only way that'd be like, okay, though, is if that happened and those guys played well enough that maybe you then flipped them for actual more assets. Like that's the only silver lining there. And then you could just go so young the second half of the year, maybe you kind of make up for it. But I agree with you.
Ted Leonsis lets you. Is he going to demand that they go for a play-in berth if they're like 8 games under 500 in January? Like, well, no, we got to keep pushing. Like we're right outside the play-in. And look, someone in the East is going to make the play-in by mistake.
Yeah.
When you look at the teams that are like competing for those spots, like once you get to 8 or 9, it's like, do these teams really even want to be here?
If they get so tempted by a play-in run that Ted like punts on the rebuild to do that, this will be the last preseason podcast we can do together because I will just not be on this earth anymore. I think is kind of where I'll be at. Like I
honestly think like Winger and Dawkins would just resign too. I think
I hope so. Yeah, you got to have enough credibility to push back there and be like, this is a bad idea.
Matt, is there anything about this team we didn't talk about that you think needs to be discussed before I let you skedaddle?
No, I mean, I think it's just this will be like a really interesting kind of thought experiment here on like how much summer league matters. Like if Alex Sarr comes in and is just like solid 10-5 from day one and just does easy, simple stuff and plays good defense, like I just never want to hear people talk about summer league ever again and what the, that actually means for people. And like vice versa, like Bub, I thought was like pretty darn good in summer league. If he struggles this year, like I don't want to hear the opposite of that either. It's just sort of like, they're rookies and you're going to let them play through mistakes. And that's what this year should be about. And I don't know. I really truly believe like Coulibaly is going to be a lot better this year. I know you and Grant are both big on him too. And we're going to defend our guy here and protect our guy at all costs. So I think he's going to take a big jump, and I think he'll be fun to watch for, fans that won't watch the NBA or watch the Wizards otherwise,
If he has anything less than a 38% usage, the Wizards have failed this year. I've decided, like, let's get it up in the 40s.
Fold the team at that point.
Matt, this was great as always. Thank you for giving me so much of your time, and even more, thank you for giving me so much of your. Although you just made me think of something. I can't remember who I was listening to on the Sarr front, where they said, like, generally speaking, when it comes to big men in summer league, their performances cannot really predict what's going to happen in the NBA. So that's probably a good sign. I don't want to, I think I know who it is, but I don't want to guess on air and attribute to them. And then also, what if I'm just lying for some reason? But that would be a vote of just like, all right, you could go ahead and throw out summer league, because it's not just, I tend not to read too much into the negatives because I want to give young players that chance. But if there's like actual data that shows big men, it's just harder to read into what you see, then that's even better. And it's, look, you mentioned it already. His role, what he was doing in summer league, if he's doing it with the Wizards, I would honestly argue they're not doing something wrong, but he's like hijacking it and deciding to do it himself at that point.
Right. Yeah. They've given him too much freedom to do those kinds of things. And hey, that's okay. You're definitely getting Cooper Flagg at that point. So it's a win-win either way.
Matt, I'll go back to my outro. This was great. Thank you for so much of your time and your insight. Are you just able to tell our fantastic listeners where they can find you and all the great content that you put out?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm enjoying in the Discord so far. So plug to everybody else. Go.
You're a legend. It's in the intro too. You're a Discord legend.
That's terrifying for anybody involved there. But I appreciate that. Yeah, Believe in Wizards. Check us out. It's me and former Wizard center Jahadi White. We're actually gonna record here later today, not the day you're listening to it, but later the day we're recording this. So get to talk about the Wizards for 2.5 consecutive hours. So that's as masochistic as it gets. But we try to talk about other stuff and get Jahadi's perspective on just like what it's like from a player's vantage point when certain things happen in the league. So even if you don't care about the Wizards, try to tease those kind of things out from him. And just, he's pretty candid and like a great dude. So, give us a try.
And also, I love the clips. Won't confess listening to the podcast, but you do a great job with the DMV hoops and those interview clips that I see posted and watch listen to. So go check that out as well. Matt, thank you for so much of your time as always. As you know by now, I will be pestering you again in the future though. So I will talk to you soon.
Let's do it.